Hello and welcome to the fourth tutorial in the Space Bubbles project. In this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to create two types of space bubbles that will be used in our game. We're going to create a white variety using the first bubble sprite and a yellow variety using the second bubble sprite. And you'll notice that both types of bubbles will move directly down the screen, but however they will travel at different rates. So the white ones will be slightly slower than the yellow ones. Okay. Once I've shown you how to create these two types of bubbles, you'll be able to create your own bubbles and add more variety to your game. Okay. So to get started, we need to come across and we need to start creating objects for our bubbles. We're going to do it in a slightly different way though than what we've done previously with the player object and the gamma ray object. We're going to use a parent-child relationship. In the game, the bubbles will, you have lots of different bubble variations, and they're all going to pretty much share the same level of code, okay? But then they will each tweak that code and maybe add to it to create slightly different behaviors, to add that different variety to the game. However, generally, they will share the same code. So we don't want to write that same code out over and over again for each of the different bubble types that we create. We want to just write it once and then share that with the bubbles so that they can all take a copy of the code. Now this is really useful because that means that we can just write the code once and share it out, but also means if we need to change it or update it, we can do it once and it will automatically change and update in all the bubble types. So if you're going to create multiple objects that are going to use the same code, it can be very useful to set up a parent object that contains all the events and actions that you want to share amongst the related objects. Parent objects will share any instructions they have with their child objects, i.e. the child objects will inherit all of the parent's events and actions and will be able to use them too. The child object can then add to or change these instructions if they wish to customize the instructions for themselves. So what does that mean for us in terms of our project? Well, we are going to create an OBJ bubble object, which will be the parent object, and we will then create two more bubble objects, bubble 1 and bubble 2, and these will be child objects of the OBJ bubble object. Okay, so whatever code we put into this parent object will be shared with these two child objects. So in the parent object, we're not going to set a sprite because that will be set in the child objects, but we will override the speed and direction variables that come with the object. We will also add in an outside room event, and we will add in a collision with the player object event and a collision with the gamma ray object event. Now these events will be true amongst all of the bubbles that we create, and that's why we're putting them in the parent object, because we're just going to create them once there and then they will be shared down to the two child objects. The child objects, when created, will of course inherit all of the parent actions and events and variables, and as you can see there, they're grayed out to show they're being inherited. But on top of that, they will then set a sprite and they will set a new speed value and a new movement direction value. Okay, so we'll be able to customize the bubble by changing its sprite, changing its speed and changing its movement direction. Okay, but everything else will be inherited from the parent object. To get started with this then, we need to come across to the objects group, right click and select create object, and then we're going to name this first one obj underscore bubble. So this is going to be the parent object. Press enter. We're not going to assign a sprite to it, we're going to leave that blank. The next thing to do is to give it some default values for the speed and direction variables. So click on the variables definitions button, that will open up the variable definitions window. Click add and type in speed, press enter, and we're going to set the basic speed value to 3 for all bubbles. Change the data type to integer because we're dealing with whole numbers here. Then click add again, and we're going to set a direction value now. So all the bubbles will come with a default direction of 270. To remind you again, 270 points down, so that means we're going to move down when we create these bubble objects, and we're going to set this to an integer data type as well. So that will be shared with all the children objects. The next thing to do is create an event that will be shared. So click add event, and we're going to have other outside of room. So this event will trigger whenever the object goes outside of the room. So double click on the title bar to refocus it. I've got my icons scaled up there, so I'll just scale them down. If you didn't know that before, you can scale up and scale down the icon sizes there to make it easier to see if you like. Now the action we want to add in is the destroy action. So this will essentially remove the instance from the room. So whenever a bubble goes outside of the room, at the moment we're just going to remove it. We're going to destroy that instance. Okay, that's fine. However, we don't always want to remove an instance, a bubble instance from the game when it goes outside of the room, because we will actually start the bubbles outside of the top of the room for the vast majority of the time, and then they will move down from the top onto the screen and then move all the way down through the screen until they go off the bottom. So we actually only want to remove the bubbles from the game when they go off the bottom of the screen. So if I show you visually what that means is, a lot of the time we will start the bubble just outside the room, just off the top side of it, and then we will spawn them in and they will begin moving down onto the level. However, they will also, when they move off the bottom, that is when we want to remove the object from the room. Okay, so we need to add a little bit of a criteria check in here. So I'm going to search for if, which is a selection statement, and we're going to drag in the if variable block, drag it so it's on the top, and we're going to say if the y coordinate, so I'm just going to type y in there, is greater than the room height plus 60, or say 128 actually, then we're going to remove the instance or destroy the instance from the level. Okay, so again, if we go back here, our room height we know is 960. So if we go down the y-axis, this is the room height. So we're saying if the bubble is greater than the room height, 960 plus 128, so it's gone off the screen quite considerably, then we are going to remove it from the game. However, if the bubble goes outside of the room but is not gone down past the bottom of the room, then we want to do something slightly different. So we're going to have the else block. So we're going to drag that in, join that onto the bottom of the if variable. If you didn't see what I did before for this destroy instance, just double check that you click and dragged it to the side of the if block and not below it. Okay, so when you click it to the clip it to the side, that means that instruction will then run if this becomes true. So if y is greater than the room height plus 128, then destroy instance. Else, what we're going to do is we're going to add in a wrap command. So drop that, again clip it to the side of the else block, and this will wrap the object around the room. Okay, so we're going to say we're going to wrap horizontally, so I'm going to untick vertical. So if the bubble goes off to the sides of the room, it's just going to wrap around onto the other side of the room. Okay, however, it will only do that if it's not below the bottom of the room. Okay, so that's what we want to do with the parent object, so we're going to close that down. Close that object down there. Next thing we do, we're going to create one of the child objects. So come across to your objects group, right click and select create object, and we're going to call it obj underscore bubble underscore 01. Press enter. This time we will assign a sprite to it because this object instance will appear in the game. Open the bubbles group and select the first one. That will bring in the first bubble graphic. We're then going to set the parent object for this, so come down and click the parent button, and then come across and click on the three dots, and then select obj underscore bubble as the parent. As soon as you do that, what you'll notice is you'll get your events list populated with the outside room event that was created by the parent. That's showing you that it is now inherited that event. So we get that event free of charge essentially because obj bubble is the parent of this object. So everything that I've done previously is now shared across. Okay, and if you click on the variable definitions, you'll also see the variables have been shared across. So that's that first bubble done. So if I close that down, and we're going to add that bubble into the room. So open the room group, double click on your room, and then click and drag in obj underscore bubble 1. So I'm going to drag in 1, 2, 3 copies of it, 3 instances of the object obj bubble1. Click the play button, and what we should see is those 3 bubbles all behaving in the same way, which is moving down the screen at a speed of 3, and that's working perfectly. Okay, just close that room down. Let's go in and create our second bubble. This time I'm going to right click and select a duplicate object just to do something slightly different. Okay, come across, and this time I'm going to rename this to obj bubble 2 this time, and I'm going to change the sprite and select SPR bubble S2, and that will give us the yellow version of the sprite. Okay. However, I want to speed this bubble up, make it a little bit faster, so what I'm going to do is overwrite the speed variable. We do this by clicking on the variable's definitions, and we're going to come over to the speed variable, and you can see it's grayed out because it's been inherited, but I'm just going to click this button here, which is essentially telling GameMaker to override this value in this object, and I'm going to set this one to 4 this time. Close that down, close this object, and then we're going to open up the room again, and this time I'm going to drag in a couple of instances of obj bubble 2. Okay, just 3 instances in there. Click the play button, and this time we should see both bubble objects in there. The yellow one's moving slightly faster down the screen than the white ones. There you go, perfect. So well done, you have now created 2 bubble types.